Hello, and welcome to Franklin County's MetroParks Students Exploring Ecosystem Dynamics SEED program. MetroParks, along with our partners at CCS, have created a series of SEED teacher training videos for you to reference as you participate in SEED. For more detailed instruction and background information for each activity, please refer to your SEED teacher manual. If you have any questions or need any additional information, please feel free to contact MetroParks at 614-891-0700 or on the web at metroparks.net. Ecosystem Basics. Students will diagram the transfer of energy through the ecosystem. For the Ecosystem Basics activity, you will need paper, markers, colored pencils or crayons, and the Ecosystem Basics SEED portfolio pages. Students may work individually or in cooperative learning groups. Please refer to the teacher manual for the background information. To begin, students should divide the paper as shown. Discuss the meaning of the word ecosystem. Students should describe the types of ecosystems they have encountered. Have students choose an ecosystem that they are familiar with for this activity. It may be fun to use a park ecosystem. Explain that students are going to diagram the ecosystem. In the column on the left, have students list everything they would find. Stress everything, but don't give any hints. Ask the students, what non-living thing provides energy to start the food web? Students should be able to state that the sun is a non-living and it provides energy. Have students draw a picture of the sun at the top left quadrant of the paper. Ask the students what things in their list take energy from the sun and make their own food. They should be able to tell you green plants. Explain that since they make or produce their own food, we will call the green plants producers. Have students write the word producer in the upper right quadrant of the page. Have students identify what organisms from their list belong in the producer section. Students should draw the examples of their producer organisms in the producer box. Explain that students will study how producers make their own food through a chemical process called photosynthesis later in the unit. Have the students represent the energy flow from the sun to the plants with an arrow. Ask the students, can everything in their ecosystem live on direct energy from the sun? The answer should be no. Ask them, how do organisms that cannot make their own energy from the sun get the energy they need to survive? Their answer should be animals must get their energy to live. Explain that since animals must eat or consume either plants or other animals to live, we call them consumers. Have students write the word consumer in the lower right quadrant of their page. Have students identify what organisms from their list belong in the consumer section. Students should draw the examples of consumer organisms in the consumer box. Have students represent the energy flow in their ecosystem from the producers to the consumers with an arrow. Discuss that the direction of the energy flow from the producers to the consumer section shows that the consumers get their energy from the producers. Discuss as a group that the sun's energy begins the energy flow. The plants use the sun's energy to grow. The consumers eat the plants, and the energy is now in the consumer. Ask students, do all consumers eat only plants? They should be able to tell you no. Explain that they are to categorize their consumers into groups. If their consumers eat the plant's energy directly, then they are primary consumer. If their consumers eat other consumers that eat plants, then they are secondary consumers. Have students label the primary and secondary consumers. If they do not have both types of the consumers listed, then give them the opportunity to add consumers to their list and their drawings. Ask the students, can we classify consumers by what they eat? They should be able to tell you yes. In a group of consumers, what do you call an animal that eats only plants? Herbivore. Students should label one example of a herbivore on their papers. In a group of consumers, what do you call an animal that eats only other animals? Carnivore. Students should label one example of a carnivore on their papers. In a group of consumers, what do you call an animal that eats plants and animals? Omnivore. Students should now label one example of an omnivore on their papers. Note: call attention to the fact that consumers are designed or adapted to survive by eating specific diets. Organisms fall into specific groups of herbivore, carnivore, and omnivore, and they cannot switch. For example, cows' stomachs are specially designed to digest grass. If all the grass died, the cow would not be able to switch diets and start hunting snakes. Ask students what group they belong to. Most will say omnivore. Some students may say herbivore if they're vegetarians. Have students compare the consumers they have listed and drawn on their sheets. Is there some part of their bodies that can help them get their energy? Students should be able to say that all their animals listed have a mouth. Explain that there is another group of consumers that do not have a mouth. This group of consumers are not animals and they absorb their energy instead of eating. Explain that this group has a special role in the ecosystem. They break down dead matter and recycle it into usable form. We call this specialized group of consumers decomposers. Have students write the word decomposer in the bottom left quadrant of the paper. Ask what happens when producers and consumers die. Students should be able to tell you that they rot, decay, or decompose, and that living organisms are responsible for this. Ask the students what would happen without these organisms. And they should be able to tell you that dead things would remain on the ground and never go away. Have students identify decomposers. Students should list and draw decomposers in the decomposer section. If students are having difficulty identifying decomposers, ask, what grows on bread if you leave it in a moist, dark place? They should be able to tell you fungus or mold. Ask the students, what grows in your shower curtain? Sometimes they'll be able to tell you fungus or mildew. Ask them, what does Lysol kill? Sometimes they can tell you germs, another common name for bacteria. You can also ask them, what has a stem and a cap, grows in damp places in a forest, and tastes good on pizza? The fungus or mushroom does. Have students represent the energy flow with an arrow. Students should draw arrows from both the producer and consumer sections to the decomposer section. Have students compare all organisms shown in the producer, consumer, and decomposer specialized consumer section. Ask students if they can find a common trait for all these organisms. They should be able to tell you that everything in these sections are living organisms. Introduce the term biotic. Producers, consumers, and decomposers are all biotic elements in our forest. The last quadrant, the upper left, already has a sun in it. Remind students that they have discussed that the sun was non-living and supplied energy to the plants. Introduce the term abiotic. Abiotics are parts of the ecosystem that are non-living and never have lived. Students should write the word abiotic in the section with the sun. Students should list abiotic parts of the ecosystem and draw their representations in the abiotic section. Sunlight, air, water, soil. If the students struggle with this concept, have them identify their basic needs, air, water, food, etc. Explain that soil is made of all different things, rocks and minerals that are abiotic, and broken down organisms that are biotic. Have students represent the energy flow with an arrow from the decomposers to the organic part of the soil. Call attention to the fact that abiotics have never lived. You may want to explain that organisms and/or components of the ecosystem do not change from one group to the other. Have students give examples of biotic versus abiotic items in the classroom. And once again, draw examples of abiotic components and allow students a few minutes to complete their diagrams. Producers make their own energy using the abiotic parts of the ecosystem, sunlight, air, soil, and water. Have students circle the producers in green. Consumers must gain their energy by outside sources. Have students circle the consumers in red. Remember that the items in the consumer section and decomposer sections should be circled. Have students identify any direction energy might flow in their ecosystem. For example, consumers may eat fungus or mushrooms. Thank you for watching this MetroParks Seed instructional video. For more information about Seed or any MetroParks programming, please contact Tanya Taylor, Education Administrator, MetroParks, at 895-6206 or Tanya Taylor at metroparks.net.